First of all, sorry for the 1 hour delay due to unavoidable circumstances. The session had to be delayed by 1 hour. So, just for today, we'll have the class from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Of course, I will give you a break in between. So, we'll have a class from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. But from tomorrow, it will be the regular time from 5 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. So, let's begin the first class on disaster management. Disaster management happens to be a very important subject under GS paper 3. It is a mains oriented subject. I'm sure all of you would have gone through the syllabus at least by now. So in GS paper 3, after Indian economy, science and technology, environment ecology, etc., at the end, you have the subject called disaster management, where we study about different types of disasters, the impact of disasters, and how we can manage those disasters. It is a relatively smaller subject compared to the other bigger subjects. But nevertheless, you cannot underestimate the importance of this subject because you get guaranteed questions in GS paper 3 from disaster management. The subject can also be relevant for your prelims. You can expect few prelims questions as well from disaster management. The reason why the subject becomes so important is because today we are living in a world which is hit by multiple disasters, that too regularly. I'm sure all of you would be reading newspapers. Just look at the disasters that have hit India and the rest of the world in the last 2 months. India, South Korea, and many others have been devastated by heavy rains that have caused floods, landslides, and large-scale devastation. Even in South America, countries like Peru, Colombia are suffering from the impact of heavy rains and floods. On the opposite end, you have other countries like European countries and even United States that have been suffering from devastating heat waves and forest fires in the last few days. In Italy, Greece, Spain, and also in California, temperatures have hit record levels. And the heat wave condition is so serious that people are falling sick. And it is leading to forest fires as well, causing large-scale displacement of people. Just yesterday, it was reported that at the popular Rhodes Island in Greece, thousands of tourists had to be evacuated because of deadly forest fires. So these disasters which are occurring with greater frequency and intensity, they are causing large-scale damage to human life, to property, and to the environment itself. These disasters have a widespread impact on the entire region, on the entire country. And as a result, it becomes very important to understand disaster management from a governance point of view. That is why UPSC will also pay more attention to this subject. Even though it's a smaller subject, you will get guaranteed questions in GS paper 3, at least 2 to 3 questions. And you can expect few questions in your prelims as well. And the best part is that the subject is very easy, very simple, provided if you cover the subject in a structured manner. So I'm here for the next 5 days to help you cover this subject in a structured manner so that we cover all the key topics. And the other advantage of disaster management is that it's a multidisciplinary subject. It is closely linked with other subjects like geography. It is linked with international relations. It is linked with environment and ecology, science and technology, and also with polity and governance and economy. Disaster management as a subject is a multidisciplinary subject having close linkages with the other subjects. So whatever you study here will directly help you in these subjects as well. A disaster management related question can come in geography, can come in polity, can come in international relations, or in environment and ecology. You can even expect an essay topic based on disaster management. Even in ethics, in your ethics paper as well, you can expect case studies linked with disaster management. So never underestimate the importance of this small subject. That's the best part. That is the best advantage for you. It's a small subject with very few topics to cover. And once you put in that effort, once you attend these 5 classes and revise everything and stay up to date with current affairs, you can answer all these questions and get maximum marks. Is that clear? That's why at the very beginning, I'm trying to ensure that you guys realize the importance of disaster management. It's very easy to cover, and trust me, your efforts will be worth it. The effort you put in and the returns you get will make it totally worth it. Is that clear? So just to sum up, it's a mains oriented subject. We will focus more on analysis and discussions rather than facts. You will get questions in GS paper 3 under disaster management itself. Plus, you can expect few prelims questions and related questions in the other subjects. So today, in the first class, I will take you through the syllabus. I will help you understand few basic fundamental concepts, and we will cover the introduction to disaster management. We will also talk about the classification of disasters, how disasters are classified. I will start taking up disasters one by one after this module. We will take up each disaster and understand everything about the disaster. What are the causative factors? What is the impact of a disaster? How do we manage? How do we deal with these disasters? Everything will be covered comprehensively. Is that clear? So in module 1, we will focus on the introduction, the basic concepts, and classification of disasters. In the next module, we will take every disaster separately, like floods, earthquakes, droughts, landslides, etc. We will study every disaster one by one. Got it? So let's look at the syllabus. Let's understand what topics should we exactly cover under this subject. If you look at GS paper 3, UPSC has only mentioned disaster and disaster management in the syllabus. It's just a one-line syllabus which UPSC has given for us. So obviously, this is not enough for us to understand which topics we need to cover. In this regard, UPSC syllabus is not sufficient to understand what topics should be covered. So what I have done is that, based on the syllabus given by UPSC and analysis of previous question papers from 2013, after having gone through all the questions from 2013 in your mains question papers, I have narrowed down the syllabus to these important topics. This is what sets the boundary for our preparation. Is that clear? See, disaster management is a very big field. It's a very big domain. Even if we take classes for 1 month, we can't cover everything. It's a very big specialization in itself. But of course, we need not become specialists for UPSC exam. Our goal is to cover the basic topics through which we can answer all the questions asked by UPSC. So based on this brief syllabus given by UPSC, I have compared this with previous year's questions from 2013. Based on that, I have shortlisted the most important topics. So we'll start with the introduction, covering some basic concepts, which we will wrap up today. Next, we will understand the types of disasters, natural and man-made disasters, and each disaster under it. We'll talk about the vulnerability of India towards each disaster. We will discuss the disaster management cycle, the approach which is adopted towards disaster management. We shall take a look at the global framework, the international framework with regard to disaster risk reduction and disaster management. We have few UN-led conventions, the Yokohama Convention, Hyogo Convention, and Sendai Convention. There are 3 important global frameworks brought out through the United Nations that deals with disaster management. We shall be discussing this as well. And we shall talk about the legal framework and regulatory framework in India with regard to disaster management. After understanding the global approach, we shall take a look at disaster management in India. Do we have a legal framework for disaster management? Is there a law? Yes, the answer is yes. It is the Disaster Management Act of 2005. This provides the legal framework in India and creates an architecture for disaster management in the country. There are few dedicated institutions that have been set up through this law to focus on disaster management. There are dedicated funds which have been set up to sponsor and finance disaster management initiatives. So we shall cover this in complete detail as these topics are extremely important for the exam. We will talk about the disaster management architecture and institutions in the country, and under each discussion, I will try to provide as many examples as possible. We will take up several recent disasters as case studies. We will look at some disasters in India and around the world which have happened in the last few years, and we will use them as examples for our case studies. So this will comprehensively cover the syllabus. It is more than sufficient, and trust me, if you are able to cover these topics, it is more than enough for this subject. You can answer any given question. Is that clear? So this is the syllabus needed. Now coming to your reading material. What should you read from? What material should you refer? Please trust me on this. Don't rely on any textbook. You don't need a textbook for this subject. It's a very, very dynamic subject. Yes, there is a static part. There are few concepts involved, but the subject is largely driven by current affairs. So for such a subject, there's no point in preparing from a static textbook. All right. The class PPT and the class notes that you're going to make when I'm discussing, this will be your primary reading material. I've kept the PPTs as detailed as possible. All the necessary points and images have been added. Along with that, when I'm discussing key points, please make it a habit to make short notes during the class. Is that clear? Wherever needed, I'll slow down. I'll repeat the point. I'll highlight those points as well. So please make a note of those points which I'm discussing. So the class notes along with the PPT becomes your basic reading material. For your reference reading, the textbook given by Byju's will be more than enough. That's only for your reference reading, for your additional reading. The standard book which has been given by Byju's for your reference reading. So that is more than enough for a one-time read. Read it once, highlight the key points, and that's more than sufficient. Rest of it is entirely current affairs, which you will source from newspapers and some important websites. So newspapers like Hindu or Indian Express, they cover these topics very well. If you don't have the time to read newspapers, we have the daily Hindu analysis on our YouTube channel. We have weekly webinars every Tuesday and Thursday, and we do cover all disaster management related current affairs in these webinars and YouTube sessions as well. Along with that, you can visit few websites like MHA, Ministry of Home Affairs, because MHA is responsible for disaster management. The website of NDMA, the National Disaster Management Authority, and there is a UN institution which I will refer later. So these websites are more than enough to give you some additional reading material. The website of MHA, NDMA, and there is a UN institution focused on disaster risk reduction. I'll mention the name later. I don't want to confuse you right now. Later, when we discuss the global framework, there we will talk about this UN institution. So visit these three websites, navigate through the website, see if you can get some valuable information, and you can add that to your notes. That's why I told you it's a very simple, straightforward subject. You don't have to scratch your head. Once we cover the topics in the class, the PPT and the class notes become your basic material. Reference book for one-time reading, and everything else is from current affairs. Got it? So this is what you should follow as far as disaster management is concerned. That is the approach, the broad approach. Now, if you have any doubts, any questions regarding what we have discussed, please let me know. I'll take up your questions, and then I'll be starting with some introductory concepts. So please take a minute or two and ask your doubts and questions, and after that, we'll be starting with the basic concepts. Diksha is asking, sir, do we have to read about every UN convention? No. There are hundreds of UN conventions. With regard to disaster management, there are 3 UN conferences that took place. All 3 were held in Japan, at Yokohama, Hyogo, and Sendai. Only these 3 UN conferences are important for disaster management. Bharati is asking, sir, how many questions on average are asked in prelims from the subject? See, we can't put an exact number because prelims is very dynamic. Sometimes there might be 0 questions. If you're lucky enough, you might get 5 or 6 or even 8 questions related to disaster management, because the subject is linked with geography and environment and ecology, right? So on an average, we can say that maybe 4 to 5 questions in prelims might be linked with disaster management. But it's not a fixed number. Sometimes it might be 0, it might be just 1, it might be 5 or 6 as well. All right? So we can't put a number on the questions that might come in prelims. Basavraj is asking, sir, every disaster, is it important for the exam? Yes. All types of disasters can be important, but especially the ones in news, which have occurred recently, they will be even more important. Guru Charan is asking, sir, why should we study disaster management to become a civil servant? That is because as a civil servant, you will be responsible for disaster management. In every district, the district collector is the primary officer responsible for disaster management. Even the superintendent of police, the SP of the district, will be directly responsible for disaster management at the district level. Within the state government and also at the central government, IAS, IPS officers, even IFS officers play a key role in disaster management. So civil servants are the backbone of disaster management. Today, disaster management has become a part of mainstream governance. That is why civil servants, aspiring civil servants, should be well versed with disaster management. Ravi is asking, what's the total marks for disaster management in mains? As I told you, you might expect 3 questions, sometimes 4 questions. So around, I would say, 40 to 50 marks in GS paper 3. Is that clear? Maybe 1 or 2 10-mark questions and 1 or 2 15-mark questions. So anywhere between 30 to 50. That is the number of questions you can expect in mains. Santosh is asking, sir, man-made disasters are more important than natural disasters. Not really. Both types of disasters are equally important, because natural disasters are extremely dangerous and man-made disasters are equally dangerous. So both are equally important. You can't just prioritize one over the other. Nikhil is asking, sir, how is it linked with science and technology? Of course, disaster management is linked with science and technology. Because let's say I'll give you one example. With regard to forecasting a cyclone, science and technology is involved, right? Weather forecasting, meteorological modeling and estimates. That is what helps us understand how a cyclone is forming, where it is occurring, where it will make landfall. So you can give real-time alerts and evacuate the people on time. So science and technology is very crucial. So through scientific advancement, you can become better at predicting disasters. You can provide real-time alerts and ensure that people are safe. So there is a direct connection between the two subjects. Anu is asking how polity is involved in disaster management. I just mentioned the law, the Disaster Management Act in the country, right? That is what creates a legal framework in India for disaster management. So that is related to polity, right? Also, there is an aspect of center-state relations involved. What is the responsibility of state governments? What's the responsibility of the center when it comes to disaster management? So that is a element connected with polity. I'm seeing that there are many questions related to cyclones, landslides, man-made disasters, etc. Don't worry, I'll address all of them. We are yet to begin. We are just at the start. Once I cover these topics, automatically these doubts will get addressed. Or else you can always bring up the question again, but not now. We are yet to start those topics. I will cover all the topics, don't worry. So keep those questions on hold. Okay, so I think these are some of the basic doubts. Now, let us start with few basic concepts. Let me start with a very definition of a disaster. Right? That's the most basic concept that you should understand. What is a disaster? Let's say tomorrow your friend or your family member asks you as a aspiring civil servant, what is a disaster? How do you define it? Right? This could come up in a day-to-day conversation. Right? They might read from newspapers and they might ask you more information about a disaster. So what will you tell them? How can you define a disaster? Can you do this in your own words? Let me help you understand what exactly is a disaster. According to the Disaster Management Act of 2005, a disaster is a calamity, meaning it's a catastrophic event. It's a catastrophic event which has very, very serious consequences. When such a disaster were to occur, if it were to occur in a particular area or in a particular region, it will cause large-scale human suffering. There will be a threat to human life. Is that clear? There will be a number of deaths and injuries because of such a calamity. And such a disaster could be either natural, it might be a naturally occurring event, or it could be a man-made catastrophe, or it could be a combination of the two. There are cases where natural disasters are aggravated in their impact through man-made factors. Take, for example, climate change. Global warming that we humans have caused, anthropogenic global warming, has contributed to changes in the weather patterns, in atmospheric circulation, in the wind patterns, in sea surface temperature, right? There is a permanent change which is happening because of global warming and climate change. And this drives extreme weather events. Climate change is driving extreme weather events such as cyclones, floods, cloudbursts, landslides. These extreme weather-related events are increasing in their frequency. They are occurring more frequently. And even their intensity, their magnitude is much higher than before. And there is evidence to show that climate change is partly responsible for this. Human-induced climate change is partly responsible for more extreme weather events which are occurring with more severity. Is that clear? Compared to a few decades or few centuries before, in the last few years, we are witnessing more number of disasters, which means the frequency of disasters has gone up. If 8 or 10 cyclones were forming in the Indian Ocean before, today we are witnessing 15 to 20 cyclones being formed in the Indian Ocean. Along with increase in frequency, the impact also has increased. The magnitude, the intensity of the disaster has increased because man-made factors have driven these extreme weather events. So these are cases where a disaster is occurring because of a combination of natural factors and man-made factors. Is that clear? So a disaster is essentially a calamity, a catastrophic event. It's an unfortunate event occurring due to natural or man-made causes, which is resulting in large-scale loss of human life. There will be a lot of deaths and injuries, and there will also be destruction of property. both private property, houses, agricultural farmland, cattle which has been reared by farmers. All such private property could be destroyed during a disaster. Houses could be entirely uprooted, or agricultural fields could be flooded. Cattle could lose their lives in a disaster, thus incurring losses for the farmer. So there will be destruction of private property along with destruction of public property, that is public infrastructure. Large-scale disasters can destroy roads. It can destroy railway lines, power cables, water supply. All such essential infrastructure can be disrupted and destroyed in a disaster. Even critical infrastructure like airports, seaports, then power plants, all such critical facilities as well could suffer damage, thereby affecting connectivity, thereby having an economic impact. Is that clear? So disaster is such an event, a catastrophic event, where there is large-scale human suffering, there is a lot of loss of life, human loss of life, including injuries, and there is destruction of property, both private and public property and infrastructure. Along with that, there is degradation of environment as well. Disasters can cause pollution. Disasters can destroy biodiversity. For example, floods can bring a lot of sediments and waste material and toxic materials into water bodies. So water will get polluted following a flood. Correct? So this is a degradation of the environment. Or disasters can result in soil erosion. The fertility of the soil could go down, affecting vegetation and agricultural productivity. So that's a degradation of the environment. And similarly, animals, plants, and birds and aquatic life, even they could suffer because of disasters, thereby damaging and destroying biodiversity as well. So this is what constitutes a disaster. We call it a disaster because the affected region and the population, their ability to cope with the impact of the disaster will be overwhelmed. The region which is affected, the victims, and the affected region, their capacity and ability to cope with the impact, the coping capacity, will be overwhelmed because of such an event. Meaning that region, it will not be able to handle that event on its own. The victims and affected region will require outside support. They will need assistance from the outside, from other parts of the country or other parts of the world, because the disaster would have decimated that entire region. Victims would be suffering and they won't be in a position to cope with the disaster on their own or themselves. So they have to seek out outside support and assistance. These disasters have the potential to wipe out economic development of the region. Disasters are so powerful that they can push back a region by at least 15 to 20 years with regard to the development of the region. Now imagine government would have created all the infrastructure. Roads have been built, airports have been built, railway lines have been laid. One disaster is enough to wipe out the infrastructure, and you can imagine the impact on connectivity and on the local economy. If key connectivity lines are erased and destroyed, it will take years together to rebuild that infrastructure. It will take many years to bring normalcy. Normalcy will be delayed. The region will not become normal in few days or few weeks or not even in few months. The affected region, it might take months or years to come back to normalcy. So such an event is called as a disaster. It is defined as a disaster under the Disaster Management Act. All right, in simple words, disaster is a calamity or a catastrophe that can cause huge loss of life and property. That's a more simple definition. All right. This could occur either due to natural or man-made causes or a combination of both. And it also causes damage to the environment. And it breaches the capacity of the region and the victims to cope with the impact of the disaster. So such a catastrophic event is known as a disaster. Examples include a pandemic, or a tsunami, or an earthquake, or a nuclear accident, or an industrial fire, right? Or forest fires. All these are examples of disasters. Understood? I'll repeat the point. Disaster is nothing but a calamity or a catastrophic event, which means it's an unfortunate event. It's a tragedy which has occurred. This event causes large-scale loss of human life and injuries. There will be a lot of deaths and injuries causing human suffering. There will be destruction of property, both private and public property. There will be degradation of the environment, leading to pollution and loss of biodiversity. And the affected region and the population, they won't be able to cope with the impact on their own, and they have to seek outside support. The region will be set back with regard to its development. There will be a socio-economic impact on the victims and on the region because of the disaster. That's why the region will lose a sense of normalcy. Normal life will not return back immediately. It will take many more years of effort to reconstruct and rebuild the affected area and bring back normalcy to the region. So such a catastrophic event can cause serious socio-economic damage. Imagine earthquakes destroying schools and hospitals. Education and healthcare will be ruined in that affected region. Or imagine connectivity projects being destroyed by a flood or by a landslide. It will take years or maybe decades to rebuild that infrastructure. So the economy will be completely derailed. People will lose their jobs, their livelihood. Imagine there is a tsunami or a cyclone and agricultural fields have been destroyed. So farmers will lose their income. Their livelihoods would be completely uprooted. So to bring normalcy back to such a region, governments have to act proactively, or else the people will suffer for a very long period of time, and it will cause a lot of socio-economic divisions, and the region will be set back with regard to development. So this is the concept you have to understand. That is why disaster management is so important in governance. As an aspiring IAS officer or an IPS officer or as an aspiring civil servant, you have to understand and acknowledge the impact of disasters. Is that clear? Once you become a civil servant, dealing with disasters will become a part of your job description. Whether you're a district collector or a superintendent of police or working in a ministry or in a certain government department, irrespective of that, there will be a role for every civil servant in disaster management. Is that clear? Civil servants play a critical role here in helping people, in evacuating people, in assisting them, in rebuilding the affected regions. That is why UPSC has added this subject in our syllabus. When the new syllabus was introduced in 2013, there's a reason why the subject was added. Because by 2013, the number of disasters had increased, driven by man-made factors like climate change. Even other factors like land encroachment was contributing to more floods and more natural disasters. Urban flooding had increased because of encroached lakes and rivers and wetlands in our urban areas. This is a failure of governance. Extreme weather events were going up by 2013, driven by global warming. So it's because of this, UPSC added disaster management as a separate subject. All right. There is global attention paid to this area, to this domain, through the United Nations as well. And hence, it becomes very, very important for the exams. All right. So I hope everyone has understood what is a disaster. All right. If you want, I'll repeat the point. Disaster is a catastrophe. It's a calamity. It's an unfortunate tragedy which has hit a region, because of which a lot of human lives have been lost, a lot of injuries have been reported, and such a disaster can occur either because of natural or man-made factors. Got it? There will be destruction of property as well, private and public property. There will be degradation of the environment, and the region and the victims lose the ability to cope with the impact of the disaster. This is how you define a disaster. Now, see, you don't have to mug up the definition. Never do that. UPSC exam is not about rote memory. It's not about rote learning. All right? UPSC will not give you marks for memory-based answers or factual answers. Understand the concept and explain this in your own words. Build your own sentences and explain this in a paragraph if the question is asking for it. Is that clear? Now, let's look at another concept, another important keyword, hazard. Now that we know what is a disaster, let's understand what is a hazard. Hazard is a substance or a given state or a particular event which has the potential to cause a disaster. It is a potential state. Hazard is a potential state or a substance or a condition or an event which, if it were to occur, if it were to happen, then it becomes a disaster. If there is large-scale loss of life and destruction of property and environment, then the hazard becomes a disaster. I'm sure some of you would be confused, like what's the difference between the two? Let me help you understand this with an example. What's the difference between a hazard and a disaster? Now, let's say there is a mountain. All right? There is a village at the foothill of this mountain. Clear? On the slope of the mountain, let's imagine there is a huge boulder that is sitting on the slope of the mountain. Got it? So in this given situation, it's a hypothetical situation I'm giving you. If this boulder were to roll down the slope and strike this village, that is when a disaster occurs. Now imagine the same example. You have a mountain, there is a large boulder sitting on the slope, but there is no human habitation. This is situation A, this is situation B. Let's say it's an uninhabited area. You just have some vegetation, some forest land, but there are no houses, no people living in the foothills. Now, even if the boulder were to roll down the slope, it will not exactly turn into a disaster. Is that clear? That is the difference. This state represents a hazard. In both the given pictures, the presence of this large boulder on the slope of a mountain is a hazardous situation, meaning it's a dangerous situation. So it's only a potential event. It's a potential state where it might become a disaster. Now, if the boulder were to roll down and if there are people living in the foothills of the mountain, that is when it becomes a disaster. Hazard becomes a disaster only when there is large-scale loss of human life, only when there is large-scale destruction of property and environment. Now imagine if this boulder were to roll down in the second image, there will be no damage. Maybe there will be some damage to the trees and vegetation, but it won't destroy the environment. It won't destroy any infrastructure and it won't cause loss of human lives. That is the difference between a hazard and a disaster. Clear? I'll give you one more example. Now, earthquake is a hazard. It's a potential situation, a state which can cause large-scale human suffering and damage to property and infrastructure and environment. Now, imagine there is a high magnitude earthquake. Let's say a 8 magnitude earthquake has hit Delhi, because Delhi is very vulnerable. Delhi has a lot of population. It's one of the densely populated cities in the world. And the buildings in Delhi are very vulnerable because they're not earthquake resistant. So such an earthquake occurring in Delhi will cause large-scale destruction. So the hazard becomes a disaster because of the impact. Clear? Now, let's say the same earthquake occurs in a desert. Let's say it's an uninhabited desert. There is no human population at all. Zero humans, zero infrastructure. It's an uninhabited area. In such an area, if an earthquake were to occur, even if it's a 9 magnitude earthquake, the damage will be zero. So their hazard remains a hazard, does not become a disaster. Earthquake will not cause any damage when it occurs in an uninhabited area. But if it occurs in a densely populated area with poor buildings, with poor foundation, that is where the hazard becomes a disaster. Clear? That is the difference. Hazard is a state or an event or a potential substance which is dangerous, which is hazardous. And if it were to occur and cause large-scale damage, then it turns into a disaster. Clear? So there could be hazards to people, hazards to human life that could potentially cause death, injury, disease, or mental stress. I can give you one more example here. See, in the wild, there are many viruses and bacteria which are extremely dangerous. As long as it remains in the wild, it only remains a hazard. But only when the virus or bacteria jumps to humans and infects human beings and starts spreading, that is when it becomes an epidemic or a pandemic. That's when it could become a disaster. But until then, the presence of those hazardous substances remains just a hazard. Take one more example. Let's say there is a lake. Near the lake, there is a factory which is dealing and working with toxic chemicals. The presence of a toxic chemical factory near a lake is a hazard. There is a hazard present. There is a hazardous situation present. If the toxic chemicals leaks into the lake and pollutes the lake, that is when it could become a disaster, killing all the aquatic life, killing the people who consume that water. Clear? So I've given you sufficient examples to understand this difference between hazard and a disaster. Hazard is a potential state or an event or a situation or a substance that could become a disaster if there is large-scale destruction. So there could be hazards to property and to the economy, hazards to the environment as well. Only when these hazards transform into a real incident and cause large-scale damage to human life or property or environment, that is when we call it a disaster. Understood? So now, based on this understanding, I will help you understand the types of hazards present. We shall talk about natural hazards that occur naturally in our environment, on which we don't have much control. We'll also talk about man-made hazards. So hazards are basically of two types. You have natural hazards and man-made hazards. Please write this down. Very, very important. The types of hazards are of two types: natural, man-made. Natural hazards can be in turn classified into these following categories: hydrological, meteorological, climatological, geophysical, biological, and extraterrestrial. So please make a mark. You have to remember the different types of natural hazards. Now, we will discuss each hazard one by one. I'll help you understand what is a hydrological hazard, what is a meteorological hazard. The concept you will study here can be very important for prelims. UPSC can give you 3 statements. 1 statement about hazard, 2 statements about types of hazards, and it might ask you to check whether the statements are correct or wrong. These are conceptual questions based on static knowledge, right? So now that you have understood what is a hazard, let's talk about the types of natural hazards that are naturally occurring in our environment. First, we have hydrological hazard. As the name itself indicates, these are hazards which are a result of water flow on the Earth's surface. The flow of water on the surface of the Earth could lead to disasters. It represents a hazardous condition. Such hazards are called hydrological hazards, primarily caused by the flow of water, the manner in which the nature of water flow on the Earth's surface could lead to these disasters called floods and landslides. So floods and landslides, they become examples of hydrological hazards. Is that clear? Let's say a region receives heavy rainfall, or there is a cloud burst in a hilly mountainous area. So when there is a sudden flow of water, right, and if the drainage capacity, the holding capacity of the drainage basin is breached, the excess water spills over, causing a flood in the downstream area. These floods can weaken the soil material in slopy areas, and they can trigger secondary disasters like a landslide. Landslide is usually a secondary disaster triggered by a primary disaster. So flood is one trigger for landslides to occur. When there is massive flooding and heavy excessive flow of water, right, especially in hilly slopy areas, the soil structure becomes weak. It becomes saturated with water. So when the soil material cannot hold on to itself, it might slip down because of the influence of gravity. Gravity might pull down the earth material, the soil, rocks, and vegetation. It might come crashing down the slope, which we call as a landslide, or it's also called a mud slip or landslip. They all mean the same. Is that clear? The sudden slippage or sliding down of soil material in a slopy area and it crashing it into the valley is a landslide or a landslip. Usually landslides are secondary disasters triggered by a primary disaster. Floods have the potential to trigger a landslide. Other than floods, there are other primary disasters as well, like earthquakes. Earthquakes can also trigger landslide. Certain man-made hazards can also trigger a landslide. We'll come to that later. But as of now, please understand that flood can trigger a landslide. Thus, flood-triggered landslides become secondary disasters, and it's a type of hydrological hazard. Next, you have meteorological hazard, which is a result of the meteorological phenomena. Essentially, it's a weather-based phenomena. Meteorological phenomena can trigger extreme weather events. Extreme weather events. So such extreme weather events, which are a result of extreme weather, obviously, they are called meteorological hazards. For example, a cyclone, a severe storm, cyclone or hurricane or typhoon. They're known by different names, but essentially the phenomena is the same. The process involved in cyclone formation is exactly the same, be it a hurricane or a typhoon or a cyclone, right? This is a result of meteorological conditions. It's a result of weather-based phenomena, meteorological phenomena. Extreme temperatures leading to heat wave or cold wave. All these are meteorological hazards. They can also trigger secondary disasters. Cyclone can trigger coastal flooding. Heat wave and extreme temperature conditions can trigger wildfires and forest fires, right? So there will be secondary associated disasters here as well. But those primary hazards, which are a result of weather-based phenomena or which are a result of extreme weather events, they are called meteorological hazards. Next, climatological hazards, which are primarily a result of long-term climate change. Long-term changes in climate which is occurring, either due to natural or man-made causes. This could be natural and even man-made, or aggravated by man-made factors. Such hazards are called climatological. climatological hazards. Forest fires essentially are a result of long-term change in climate. Is that clear? I hope you understand the difference between weather and climate. You would have studied this in geography. Weather is more of a localized phenomena, which is specific to a particular region. And weather is seasonal, right? Weather is for few weeks or few months. Like you have summer season, winter, rainy season, spring, autumn. That is weather, which is seasonally changing. And it is specific to a given region. Climate is a long-term phenomena occurring across the world or occurring over a very large area for decades and centuries together. So climate-based events can also lead to hazardous conditions. Long-term change happening in our climate. Climate change can happen naturally as well, right? And it could be triggered and aggravated by man-made factors, by anthropogenic factors. So such changes in the climate can drive these events like forest fires, droughts, GLOF events, glacial lake outburst flood events. These are classic examples of climatological hazards caused by long-term changes in the climate. Next, biological hazard, obviously caused by biological agents, caused by deadly pathogens. It could be a virus or a bacteria or a fungus. There are even few toxic algae. You also have insect or pest infestation, which can lead to a disaster. So if biological agents are responsible for large-scale loss of life and large-scale economic impact, such hazards are called biological, which are of biological origin. So toxic algal blooms, epidemics and pandemics, insect infestation, all these are examples of biological hazards. Now, can you guys give me any example of an insect infestation which has been known to become a disaster? Do you guys know of any specific example related to insects where it has become a disaster? Some students are mentioning locust attack. Very good. Locust infestation can become a disaster for agriculture in particular and to the environment. Locust is a type of insect. It looks like a grasshopper, and these locusts can multiply in large numbers and they can swarm the entire region. Millions and millions of locusts can infest an entire region, and they even migrate. They even start moving from region to region. In fact, recently we have suffered from a locust infestation. In the last 3 years itself, from Africa to West Asia to India, this whole region was very badly affected by a locust infestation. These locusts, they destroy crops. They wipe out agriculture wherever they go, thus causing a huge economic impact on farmers and the rural economy. So these are disasters, biological disasters triggered by biological agents. Then, of course, you have examples like COVID-19 pandemic triggered by a highly pathogenic virus. So similarly, bacteria, fungus, or any infectious and toxic bioagent causing such a disaster is a biological hazard. Next, you have geophysical hazards, which is a result of the Earth's geology. Geology of the Earth, if it's responsible for a disaster, those hazards are called geophysical hazards. It's a result of tectonic movement of the tectonic plates below the Earth's crust, and the seismic activity triggers many types of hazards which are known as geophysical hazards, right? The movement of tectonic plates, the subsidence, which occurs at the mantle level can trigger earthquakes, volcanoes. All these are geophysical hazards turning into a major disaster. So the geology of the earth, the tectonic movement, the seismic activity inside the earth's surface at the mantle level and at the crust and mantle level, they cause these events which are geophysical in nature. Then finally, the last category. You can also mention tsunami as an example. Tsunami is also a result of a geophysical event. Underwater earthquakes. Underwater earthquakes and underwater volcanoes. And even underwater landslides occurring because of geophysical events. They have the potential to trigger a tsunami. All right. So tsunami also is an example of geophysical hazard because it's primarily triggered by a geophysical event, either by an underwater earthquake or a volcano or an underwater landslide. So all these are examples of geophysical hazards. Now coming to the last category of natural hazards, extraterrestrial hazard. Hazards which are alien to Earth. Of course, I'm not talking about an alien attack, right? I'm not talking about a intelligent species carrying out an attack, even though one can't rule out that possibility. The more realistic threats from outer space include adverse space weather. You guys would have studied about solar storms and solar flares. It's a very common occurrence, by the way. Of late, we have been noticing increased solar activity, and we are witnessing solar flares and storms and a burst of solar radiation that is constantly hitting the Earth's atmosphere. I hope you know that these solar storms can damage the satellites and electronic equipment. It can disrupt communication and power supply on the ground. So along with the economic impact, these solar storms and flares potentially can destroy life on Earth. Is that clear? It could affect the atmosphere itself. It could wipe out life on Earth itself. That is the potential of adverse space weather. Near Earth objects, comets, asteroids, which potentially are on a collision course with the Earth. If they were to collide, then this would be an apocalyptic event. Some of the hazards have apocalyptic potential. An asteroid strike can wipe out life on Earth permanently. Life could be driven towards extinction by such a extraterrestrial event. Recently, for example, there was a large asteroid that passed very close to Earth, which went undetected just a week back. Scientists and astronomers, they detected this asteroid after it passed the Earth. All right. In the past, millions of years ago, we have had events where asteroids have struck the Earth's surface and destroyed life and altered weather and climate for a very long period of time. Like how dinosaurs were driven to extinction. It's believed that an asteroid strike was primarily responsible. So these are apocalyptic events which can completely wipe out life on Earth. Even a pandemic is an apocalyptic event. A deadly pathogen might come up which has the potential to wipe out most of the life forms. Even large-scale earthquakes and volcanoes are apocalyptic in nature. They can have a global impact. Imagine a massive volcanic eruption that spews not just lava and magma, but also releases a lot of dust and particles into the atmosphere. The dust and particles will spread and they could cover the Earth's atmosphere, thus blocking sunlight. All right, so volcanoes have that potential. A massive volcano can block out sunlight, thus cooling down the Earth drastically, which changes climate and weather, destroying crops and life forms and altering every ecosystem that we know. So such large-scale events, they have apocalyptic potential. Understood? So extraterrestrial hazards, pandemics, earthquakes, and volcanoes. These are hazards which have apocalyptic potential. So you cannot take these hazards lightly. Every hazard is equally dangerous, and we have to pay attention, we have to plan, we have to prepare so that we can reduce the impact of these natural hazards. Got it? So this completes the basic explanation on the types of hazards, the classification of natural hazards. Now, we will talk about the second category of hazards, which are man-made, which are anthropogenic in its nature. These are human-induced, caused by human activities. These man-made disasters, particularly industrial disasters, they occur maybe as an accident. Sometimes no single person or institution is responsible. Just as an accident, there could be an industrial disaster, or it could be a result of negligence. Maybe in an industry, safety standards have not been followed, or the industry owners, to make more profits, they have not invested in adequate servicing and maintenance of equipment. Maybe they have not replaced the spare parts, or they haven't got the servicing done on time, or maintenance of the equipment is very poor. So this could result in a tragedy where hazardous substances might leak, causing an industrial disaster. So it could occur because of human negligence as well. Or it could be a result of sabotage, where someone has deliberately destroyed some equipment or manipulated the functioning in an industry, in a factory, to cause an accident, to cause a disaster. Maybe a disgruntled employee. Let's say some employees are unhappy with a factory, and to take revenge, they might manipulate the functioning, leading to an accident or a disaster. Or maybe terrorists who are looking to carry out an attack, they might deliberately sabotage a chemical factory to leak a toxic chemical that could kill thousands of people. So even because of sabotage, industrial accidents and disasters can happen. So leakage of a toxic gas, like the Bhopal gas tragedy, boiler explosions, which are very common, especially in metallurgical industries, where there are furnaces. In a furnace, you have high temperature, high pressure conditions. So any boiler explosion releases heat and steam and extreme pressure and causes an explosion that could kill the factory workers. Then industrial fires occurring in a factory or in an industry. All these are examples of industrial disasters. These are man-made in nature, occurring because of an accident or pure human negligence or due to sabotage. The other category of man-made hazard is CBRN. CBRN stands for chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear hazard. This is usually a result of warfare or terrorism. Such hazards are categorized separately, where one country is deliberately using chemical weapons or biological weapons or nuclear weapons against another country. Or a terrorist group has got hold of chemical, biological agents, or a dirty bomb consisting of radioactive material and nuclear material. When such attacks are carried out, either due to a war between countries or due to a terror attack, these disasters are called CBRN hazards. They are treated separately because of the large-scale impact. To deal with such hazards, you need specialized skills, specialized equipment, specialized training. All right? And CBRN hazards, they also involve an element of national security and foreign policy. It requires a role for the military, for intelligence agencies. So that is why CBRN hazards are classified separately from other regular man-made hazards. All right. If there is a chemical event or a biological, radiological, nuclear event due to a warfare or due to a terror attack, they are treated separately because they have a large-scale impact. They cause a lot of devastation. Using such weapons is inhuman, prohibited under international law. And to deal with those events, to deal with those disasters, you need special skills, equipment, and training. It involves an element of national security and foreign policy. It requires the involvement of intelligence agencies, armed forces, etc. That is why CBRN hazards are categorized separately under man-made hazards. Now, any of these hazards, if they were to occur and cause large-scale destruction of life and property, that is when it becomes a disaster. Right? It's as simple as that. I think now you would have understood, right? What is a disaster? What is a hazard? Types of hazards, natural and man-made, and how these hazards can turn into a disaster. This is an essential concept, a very, very basic concept that you guys have to be familiar with. All right. Now, please let me know if you guys have understood. Any questions, let me know. I'll try to take up a few questions. And after that, I'll move to the next part of my discussion. SMEs, please push the questions to the dismiss section. Please select all the good questions and push them to dismiss section so we can pick them up and answer them. Nikki is asking, sir, please explain meteorological hazard again. Meteorological hazard is a result of weather-based phenomena. Like, for example, heavy rainfall in an area, as it is occurring right now. Right? You have seen in the last few days, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, even Punjab, Gujarat, right? They've all received heavy rainfall, causing other related disasters like floods, landslides, etc. So disasters which have their origin in meteorological events or in weather-based phenomena, they are called meteorological hazards. It's a result of extreme weather events. Got it? So they are called meteorological hazards. Parveen is asking, tectonic movement means. You will study this in geography. See, the Earth's interior is made up of these tectonic plates. All right? At the junction of the crust and the mantle, you have these tectonic plates on which the land mass is sitting. The movement of these tectonic plates, they are actually in movement because they are sitting on fluids. They are sitting on hot mantle, lava and magma. So these tectonic plates, they move. They crash into each other. Two tectonic plates, they rub against each other. They might be drifting away from each other, or one plate could be diving under the other plate. So any such tectonic movement induces vibrations, causing earthquakes, or any breach of the fractures at the tectonic junctions could release the magma upwards, causing volcanoes. So that is how tectonic events contribute to seismic activity and lead to earthquakes and volcanoes. Laya is asking, only disasters from India will be our portion? No, not really. Disasters from India and even important disasters from around the world can be important for the exam. Major disasters like recent forest fires in Australia, heat wave conditions in Europe, right? Massive floods in South Korea. Even such disasters occurring in other countries can be used as examples when you're writing answers. So your knowledge should not be limited just to disasters in India. You should keep a track of major disasters occurring in other parts of the world as well. Because see, these disasters, they don't have boundaries. Natural disasters especially, they don't affect only one country. Correct? They are transnational in nature. Now, for example, floods in Nepal will affect India because we are sharing the Ganga river system. Floods in India will affect Bangladesh. Floods in China will affect India. So disasters are truly transnational in nature, right? Boundaries are irrelevant. So you can't just focus on disasters in India, but you have to focus on important disasters around the world. Vaishna is asking, please repeat the difference between primary and secondary disaster with an example. Primary disaster is the first hazardous event which is occurring. And if the first hazard triggers one more hazard causing another disaster, that becomes a secondary disaster. Let me explain this with an example. Let's say in the Himalayan mountains, there is a massive earthquake. The earthquake is the primary event. That is the primary hazard that turned into a disaster. So earthquake is a primary disaster in this example. Now this earthquake can trigger landslides. Got it? So landslide, because of this earthquake, becomes a secondary event, a secondary hazard causing the disaster. So landslide in that case becomes a secondary disaster. Now I'll tell you something even more interesting. Landslide could cause a flood. You know how? When a landslide occurs, a lot of soil material, earth material, rocks, they come crashing down from the slopey area and crashes into the valley. So all the material which has crashed into the downstream area forms a temporary natural dam. So in the valley, the water flow will be affected. In the river channel below, the flow of water gets affected, it's blocked, and a natural dam will get formed. But this soil structure which has formed, which is temporary in nature, it's not strong enough to hold the water. So at some point, the natural dam is going to breach. It's going to rupture, causing a flash flood in the downstream area. So in that case, flood becomes a tertiary disaster. So earthquake was the primary event, causing a landslide, which is a secondary event, and landslide contributing to a flood. So that becomes a tertiary event. So that is how disasters are interlinked. It's a very complex interconnection that you have to understand. Mithun is asking, sir, who decides on which basis that a particular event is a disaster? See, first of all, you have scientific experts who classify these hazardous events as disasters, and every government will have their own policy. All right, they will have their own disaster management policy through which they notify disasters. So in India, we have National Disaster Management Policy and Plan that has been notified under Disaster Management Act. So the government of India can notify these events as disasters. Abhinav is asking, is COVID-19 pandemic natural or man-made? Because it leaked from Wuhan Institute of Virology. First of all, don't listen to rumors and conspiracy theories. According to available evidence in the public domain, COVID-19 broke out naturally, most likely in the wild. Yes, there have been theories and reports about this being a leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Even if there was a leak, right, it could have been an accidental leak, or it could be deliberate as well. But we don't have enough evidence to pinpoint the source. Is that clear? Based on available evidence, most countries have agreed that COVID-19 was a natural pandemic. The virus made a zoonotic jump from the wild into human beings. It's highly unlikely that it came from a man-made source. Is that clear? So don't get into conspiracy theories. Look at what available evidence is suggesting. Is that clear? And also, we will come to COVID-19 later. I will discuss pandemics later separately in a different class. So there I'll explain more about this. So please hold on until then. Gulam is asking, hydrological, meteorological are the same. No, they are not. Hydrological is a result of just water flow. Now, for example, there is a dam. The dam might burst because of poor structure and poor construction, because of man-made negligence. The dam might burst, triggering a flood. That is a hydrological hazard. Heavy rain triggering a flood is a hydrological hazard. But the heavy rain which occurred is a meteorological hazard. So both are connected, of course, but you can't say hydrological, meteorological are the same. They are not. Is that clear? Because of extreme meteorological events like heavy rainfall, there could be hydrological hazard like floods. So flood purely is a hydrological event, triggered possibly by meteorological factors or even by man-made factors like the damage to a dam. Imagine terrorists might attack a dam, right? The explosion might breach the dam, causing a flood. So it's a man-made disaster, but of a hydrological nature. So please don't say that hydrological, meteorological are the same. Meteorological hazards are because of the weather, because of meteorological phenomena. Hydrological hazard is because of the flow of water on the surface of the earth. So both are very different. Okay. So guys, these were the questions. Now let's come back to the discussion. Let's talk about another important concept, vulnerability. You have understood disaster, you have understood hazard and types of hazards. Now I'm taking you to another concept called vulnerability. Vulnerability to a hazard is what turns hazard into a disaster. What do you mean by this? See, any given region or population will have a certain degree of resistance to withstand the impact of a hazardous event. If a community is prepared, if they have planned well, if they have taken the right measures, it is possible to prevent a disaster from occurring. If not prevent, you can at least minimize the impact, mitigate the impact. So there are certain regions which are less vulnerable to the impact of a disaster through better planning, through better preparedness, and also due to some natural factors. Certain communities, certain regions, certain countries, they are less vulnerable. Meaning, even if the hazard turns into a disaster, the impact will be less because of the degree of resistance offered. But at the same time, certain regions, certain communities and countries may not be well prepared. They might have a higher degree of exposure. They might be more exposed to the impact, making them more vulnerable to the impact of a disaster. Now, again, if this sounds complicated, let me give you an example. Let's say there is a massive cyclone in India. Or let's not take India, let's take Myanmar. All right, let's take a poor country, a unstable country like Myanmar. Because cyclones that form in Bay of Bengal, they cause devastation not just to India but also to Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar and Thailand. Now let's say there is a massive cyclone formed in Bay of Bengal which is hitting Myanmar. At the same time, there is a massive typhoon of a similar intensity or even a greater intensity forming in the Pacific, which is striking Japan. Now, can you tell me which country is more vulnerable? Is Myanmar more vulnerable to the cyclone or Japan is more vulnerable to the typhoon? Can you give me the answer? Myanmar or Japan? Which country is more vulnerable? Obviously, Myanmar. Why? Because Japan, being a developed country, it has taken a number of disaster management measures to mitigate the impact of typhoons. Typhoons are naturally occurring. It can't be prevented. It's beyond human control. So what Japan has done through technology, through better governance initiatives, and through right investments, it has shielded the country from the impact. Japan has better early warning. It has created enough shelters where people can be evacuated and sheltered. It has built resilience in the community through better awareness, through better training. The public are aware of the impact. The public knows what to do when a typhoon alert is issued. People have been trained at the ground level, at the grassroots. Buildings have been strengthened. Construction in Japan is very well regulated. and the buildings have been strengthened to withstand the impact. Also, in the prone areas, construction is prohibited as well. So this is what happens in a country with good governance, which has effectively implemented disaster management. So Japan has reduced vulnerability. If not preventing typhoon, which is not possible for humans, we can at least reduce the damage, right? We can save lives through timely evacuation. We can reduce the damage to property and infrastructure through better design, through better planning, and through regulation. We can create structural barriers to withstand the impact and protect the population. So through these measures, you can manage vulnerability. You can manage exposure of a population to the hazard. But a poor country like Myanmar, which is hit by civil war, won't be able to take these measures. Without effective governance and without disaster management, there won't be early warning, no cyclone shelters, no training, no awareness. So disasters will hit with maximum impact, and the maximum exposure makes them highly vulnerable. Vulnerability will be maximum in such a country. This increases the impact, the eventual impact of a disaster. All right, it's one hypothetical example I'm giving you. So different regions, different countries and communities, they have varying degrees of resistance towards the impact of a disaster. So this weakness is called vulnerability. It's the characteristic of a person or a group or a region or a country with regard to their capacity to cope, to anticipate, to resist the impact of hazards. Now take India. In 1990s, if a cyclone were to hit Odisha or West Bengal or Tamil Nadu, thousands of people would die in India because we hadn't invested in disaster management. East coast of India was highly vulnerable because the people were exposed to the disaster. So high exposure was contributing to high vulnerability. And the hazard, when it turned into a disaster, would cause massive destruction, loss of lives, property, and damage to environment. But today, we have transformed ourselves. Thanks to the Disaster Management Act, thanks to better preparedness, planning, and preventive mitigative measures we have implemented, today the damage caused by a cyclone is minimal in India. In 1999, there was a super cyclone that hit Odisha and 10,000 people were killed. Now a cyclone, even of a higher intensity, if it strikes India, death count will be in single digits or lower double digits. Take cyclone Biparjoy that recently hit Gujarat. The death count was very minimal. Single digits or maximum lower double digits, not more than that. Because we have better early warning and forecasting. We can very specifically identify the formation of a cyclone, where it will make landfall, what is the impact, what time it will hit, which regions will be affected. Based on these forecasts, we can provide real-time alerts and evacuate the people. Even we have built cyclone shelters where people can be evacuated. Today, our administration, our people are better trained. There is better awareness. Because of all these measures, we have reduced our exposure, reduced our vulnerability, thereby effectively mitigating the impact of the hazard. This is the importance of disaster management. So vulnerability is a concept which helps you understand the weakness of a country, of a region or a community to the impact. It gives you an idea about the degree of resistance offered by the social system to the impact of a hazardous event. Is that clear? We can say it's a possible future state where there is high risk and high exposure. Their vulnerability will be high. If such a region is unable to cope with the impact, then the disaster's impact will be very high. So if you can manage vulnerability, reduce exposure, reduce the risk, automatically the impact will go down. Is that clear? So what contributes to vulnerability? There are natural and man-made factors that contribute to vulnerability. Geographical factors. That is something we can't control. Now, for example, east coast of India is more vulnerable to the impact of cyclones in the case of India. Interior parts of India are safe from cyclones. So a place like Delhi or Bengaluru, they are safer from cyclones. So I can say that with confidence, I can say that Delhi or Bengaluru, they are very less vulnerable for the impact of a cyclone. But Odisha, or let's say Chennai, or Gujarat, or Kerala, both east and west coast of India are vulnerable. This is a geographical factor because of the location, the nature of the geography, terrain, right? Those places are vulnerable to the impact of a cyclone. Similarly, with regard to earthquakes, floods, cloudbursts, Himalayan belt is more vulnerable. If you take earthquakes, the Deccan Plateau is more stable. So South India is more stable, less vulnerable to the impact of earthquakes. But North India and the Himalayan belt is highly vulnerable to the impact of earthquakes. Right? So that is how you determine vulnerability. It depends on geographical factors, economic factors, social factors, political, environmental, etc. All these factors play a role. Whether the country has a strong, efficient government, is there good governance, is there disaster management implemented, does the country have enough financial resources, enough technology, right? Is the environment protected in that country? All these factors will eventually determine the vulnerability. Is that clear? So please understand this concept. So by managing vulnerability, you can manage it. You can reduce your vulnerability by taking all these steps, and thereby you can cut down the impact of a disaster. Let's say you can't do anything about geography. For example, there's nothing that we humans can do with regard to cyclonic events or earthquakes. But at least through economic measures, through social measures, political measures, and environmental protection, we can build our resilience. We can increase the resistance of the community against the impact of a disaster. We can mitigate the overall impact, and that is how you manage vulnerability. Is that clear? So hazard might be there, disaster might happen as well, but by managing vulnerability and exposure and risk, you can mitigate the impact itself. This is where the concept of disaster risk comes into picture. The concept of disaster risk. Disaster risk is a combination of hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. When these three intersect, when there is a hazard, and if that region is vulnerable and exposed, that is where the disaster risk is high. If all three overlap, as you can see in this Venn diagram, you can see that hazard, vulnerability, and exposure, they are overlapping over here. So where the three overlap, this is where disaster risk is the highest. All right? Hazard might be natural or man-made. It's just a potential state, a dangerous phenomena present. But vulnerability and exposure will determine the actual impact. The physical vulnerability, geographical vulnerability, social, economic, the coping capacity, that determines vulnerability of a region or a community. And how exposed is that region? What's the population structure? What kind of agriculture or businesses are practiced? What is the quality of infrastructure built? All these factors will determine whether the region can withstand the impact of a disaster, right? When these aspects are not addressed, when there is high exposure, high vulnerability, that is when hazard becomes a major disaster. Hazard turns into a major disaster when there is high exposure and when there is high vulnerability. Please remember this connection. I've written it down, plus there is a infographic through Venn diagrams which is explaining that connection. And obviously the opposite is also true. To reduce the impact of a hazard and minimize and mitigate the impact of a disaster, you have to reduce exposure and vulnerability. If you minimize exposure and vulnerability, you can automatically bring down the impact of a disaster. Is that clear? So this is called disaster risk. Today, the focus of disaster management, is to manage disaster risk. Disaster risk reduction is the primary goal of disaster management in today's world. This has been promoted by the UN. The United Nations itself has promoted the concept of disaster risk reduction under the Sendai framework. See, right now, don't worry what is Sendai framework. I'll come to it later. In the last class, we will study the UN framework called Sendai framework. As of now, just understand that the current global framework for disaster management is under the Sendai framework brought out in 2015. And under the Sendai framework, the primary goal, the primary focus is to achieve disaster risk reduction. Got it? This is the primary focus of disaster management, to reduce the disaster risk. And how do you reduce the disaster risk? By reducing vulnerability and exposure. Because every time hazard is not in our hand. Natural hazards, they're not in our control. They're not under human control. But vulnerability and exposure can be managed. Vulnerability and exposure can be managed. And by reducing vulnerability and exposure, you can bring down the disaster risk. Got it? This is the basic concept. A very, very important concept called disaster risk or disaster risk reduction. Clear? I think now we can take a short break. We are in the middle of the session. Let's take a 10 to 15 minutes break. It's 7:32. Let's come back by 7:45. Take a few minutes break, refresh yourselves, come back by 7:45. And in the next part of the session, I'll be talking about few more important concepts. All right, I'll see you back at 7:45. can aggravate the impact of disasters. Now let's talk about the impact of environmental degradation on disaster risk. This is another very important concept. You should be familiar with how environmental degradation can aggravate the impact of disasters. I told you earlier that climate change that we humans have caused and the destruction of the environment and biodiversity that we have caused is directly contributing to the increased impact of disasters. We have seen that disaster frequency has increased and the magnitude, that is the intensity with which the disaster hits, even this has increased over the last few years. And experts believe that this is a result of environmental degradation that we humans have caused through human activities. So the relation here is very simple. The more you protect and conserve your environment and biodiversity, the lesser will be the impact of disasters, and vice versa. If you keep on destroying the environment through large-scale exploitation and economic activities, the impact of disasters is going to increase. So let me help you understand this with the help of a schematic. There is a very important flow chart through which you can easily understand the interlinkages. Now let's say we are altering the natural processes through human activities. We burnt fossil fuels in large quantities to drive our industrial revolution and our economic growth. We released large-scale greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, thus causing changes in the environment. We heated up the global atmosphere, contributed to global warming, right? This has changed the basic cycles that exist, the geochemical cycles, the biogeochemical cycles. These natural cycles have been disrupted by human activities. For example, the carbon cycle, the water cycle, and even hydrogen, phosphorus, all these essential cycles, which we call as biogeochemical cycles, they have been disrupted by human activities. We are over-exploiting our resources, carrying out large-scale deforestation. For example, to build cities, to create industrial clusters, or to expand agriculture and farming, we have to clear the forest land. So the more you destroy forests, the more you carry out deforestation, it further creates an imbalance in the entire ecosystem that drives up these extreme weather events. Extreme weather events like cyclones, floods, forest fires, landslides, droughts, they all become more aggravated in their frequency and impact because of such destruction of the environment. Because we are disturbing the equilibrium. We are disturbing nature's equilibrium, and this alterations that we are causing to the essential cycles in the ecosystem has a long-term impact on the climate. Is that clear? Deforestation will lead to loss of biodiversity. It will increase desertification, because when you clear the forest area, the trees and plants which are holding the soil, right, they go missing. So the soil becomes vulnerable for erosion. Rain, wind, these elements of nature, they carry out erosion of the soil, and soil loses fertility. That region becomes degraded. Plants will not thrive, productivity goes down, and in the long run, these areas will start turning into deserts. It will become a barren land. The rise in temperatures that we have caused through global warming is melting the glaciers and the ice caps, thereby increasing the sea levels and submerging the low-lying areas. And once you introduce more water into the seas and the oceans, right, it alters the rate of evaporation. It alters the rainfall patterns, wind circulation, and sea surface temperature. These changes which are happening on a large scale, on a global scale, will cause permanent changes in our weather and climatic patterns, leading to increased frequency and impact of disasters. This will affect livelihoods. It will result in loss of traditional methods of coping with the impact of disasters, because certain communities, they have traditional methods to withstand the impact of a disaster. Like, for example, tribal communities. Tribal communities are very protective of their forests. These tribal communities, they respect the forest, they worship the forest, and they also take certain traditional measures to protect the forest from, let's say, a disaster like forest fire, or to protect the animals and the plants in the forest. Now, when we are destroying these traditional practices, when we are exploiting the resources present, naturally, this balance between humans and nature gets disturbed, and the long-term degradation that we are causing will contribute to a series of events. It's like a domino effect. One change will contribute to several changes in other systems, right? The whole earth itself is a very complex system, right? There are very complex interactions happening between water, land, atmosphere, etc. Any slight disturbance caused by human activities will cause permanent changes or maybe irreversible changes that will have these long-term effects. I can give you one more example. In our cities, for example, we have encroached on lakes and riverbeds. You take Mumbai, for example, or Delhi, or Bengaluru, or Chennai. These cities have spread without planning. Unplanned urbanization has happened. Population has increased by millions, and we haven't created right infrastructure. So such haphazard urbanization increases land encroachment, especially in the lake bed, river bed, and wetlands, which are natural sinks for water in a city. Especially the real estate industry, the construction industry, right? They take over lake areas, riverbed areas. Essentially, they start constructing and building in the drainage area itself. So obviously, when there is heavy rainfall, it is going to flood these areas, causing urban flooding. Urban flooding is as much as a man-made disaster as it is a natural disaster. Urban flooding is a perfect example for this. So urban flooding occurs due to heavy rainfall, correct? It is a natural disaster, but human activities have contributed to it. That's why I told you, urban flooding is as much as a man-made disaster as it is a natural disaster. Our cities are getting flooded during every monsoon because we have destroyed the catchment areas. We have prevented the water from flowing naturally through its course. We have taken over the catchment areas, the drainage basins. We have built residential localities, industries, and commercial centers on lake beds and river beds. So what do you expect to happen? The natural sinks where water would have collected, they have been destroyed. So when there is a slightly heavy rainfall, the water will flood those areas, causing urban flooding. That is the connection that exists between our environment and disasters. The more you overexploit, the more you degrade your environment, the impact of disasters will be higher. And the converse is also true. One way to reduce disaster risk is to promote environment protection, promote biodiversity conservation. That is why sustainable development is very, very important. If you focus on sustainable economic growth, where you balance environmental objectives with growth objectives, then you can minimize the impact. See, we can't blindly focus just on the environment all the time. We have to grow our economy. We have to create jobs. We have to provide basic necessities to our people, provide food, education, healthcare. To provide these facilities, to provide for socio-economic welfare, the country has to grow. The state has to promote growth. And growth comes at the cost of environment. To grow the economy, we have to exploit the natural resources. But it should not be over exploitation. It should not be mindless, unregulated exploitation. If you focus on sustainable development, you can strike a balance between your growth objectives and your environmental objectives. So if a country is able to do that, if it's able to strike that balance through sustainable development, it can minimize the damage to the environment and thus bring down disaster risk. But those countries which neglect this, those countries which don't prioritize environment conservation, they will suffer because of increased frequency and impact of disasters. Is that clear? So please understand this interconnection. The more you degrade the environment, the vulnerability increases, and thus disaster risk will increase. So these hazards will become more frequent and they will be of a higher intensity, causing more devastation. Got it? Now let me take you through India's vulnerability and risk profile. Let's see where India stands with regard to vulnerability and risk, and how prone is India to the impact of disasters. I'll take you through some important charts, graphs, and infographics. This will give you a rough idea regarding how vulnerable India is to the impact of disasters. According to this data brought out by the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, according to this data, India faces the highest risk of displacement due to disasters. Is that clear? As of 2019, 5 million people in the country were displaced. This is a very, very big number. More than 5 million people were displaced because of disasters. Displacement means because of disasters, people are losing their homes. Their houses are getting destroyed. They are losing their jobs, livelihood. Farming, agriculture is getting destroyed. Fishing and animal husbandry is getting destroyed. So when people lose their jobs, their livelihood and their homes, they get displaced. They have to move to another area, right? They have to move to another safer area to protect themselves and to find new opportunities. This is what we call as displacement. So India bears the biggest burden of displacement due to disasters. Amongst all the countries, India bears the highest impact, mainly because of our population. Right? Today, we are already the world's most populous country with 1.4 billion people. So any disaster in any part of the country will have a huge impact, causing large-scale displacement, loss of livelihood, and as a result, millions of people every year are getting affected. This is not just an economic hit. It also causes social backwardness. It increases inequality in the society. That is why disasters are more brutal and the vulnerable population is more prone to the impact. For example, within our country, the rich people, even the middle class, they will be able to protect themselves better compared to the poor population. Is that clear? Now take, for example, heat wave or cold wave. The rich and the middle class, they can take sufficient measures to protect themselves against heat wave and cold wave conditions. Right? They can take shelter, they can consume enough fluids, they can take good nutritious food, they can even implement cooling and heating solutions to regulate the temperature so that they're not exposed to the extreme temperatures outside. But poor people don't have that option. Poor people like daily wage workers, construction workers, street vendors, they have no other option. Their livelihood is dependent on them working in the street. Doesn't matter whether the temperature is 48 degrees or minus 10 degrees. They have to come out every day and work in these harsh conditions to sustain their livelihood. So poor people are more vulnerable. Similarly, minorities, could be religious minorities, ethnic minorities, even gender minorities. they are more prone to the impact of disasters. That way, disasters are very unfair. They punish the poor people more. They punish the vulnerable communities more compared to the rich and the privileged. Is that clear? This will increase inequality and social divisions and also delivers a huge economic hit to the country. That is the reason why a country like India, with the world's biggest population and with so many disasters occurring in the country, we have to pay attention to disaster management. Or else we will pay a very big price, not just through economic loss and human loss, but the whole country itself could be set back with regard to its development. We will lose years of development because of disasters. Now look at this map. It is depicting the average mortality rate in our country because of disasters. Almost in every part of India, the mortality rate is quite high due to disasters. The East Coast is prone to cyclones, coastal flooding, and even to the impact of tsunamis. Northeast India is highly vulnerable to the impact of floods, landslides, earthquakes. Interior parts of India, parts of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Telangana, Chhattisgarh, etc., they are highly vulnerable to the impact of droughts. The whole Himalayan belt is prone to floods, earthquakes, landslides, cloudbursts, glacial lake outburst flood. All these disasters are very common in the Himalayan belt. Even Western India, including the dry states of Gujarat and Rajasthan, which are usually arid and semi-arid, even they are witnessing floods. Even they are getting affected by cyclones forming in the Arabian Sea. West coast of India also is increasingly becoming vulnerable to the impact of cyclones. The Western Ghats is also highly prone to floods and landslides. Is that clear? Northern parts of India is highly vulnerable to the impact of heat wave and cold wave during summer season and winter season respectively. So these disasters are taking a heavy toll on the country. Thousands of people are losing their lives every year across the country. So the mortality rate with regard to the disasters is quite high. And if you look at the graph here, it's depicting deaths per million per year across different states of India. You see the larger states here like Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, etc. With regard to the larger states in the country, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, Kerala, right? All these states, even Bihar, Assam, Maharashtra, they're all highly vulnerable. Look at the mortality rate, the number of people killed per million every year. This risk is even higher in the smaller states of the country, in the smaller states and union territories. Look at Uttarakhand, one of the most disaster-prone state in the country. Look at northeastern states, Himachal Pradesh, all of them, right? They report a very high vulnerability. The risk is high. That is why the mortality rate is also very high. Be it a large state or a small state or a union territory, they are all prone to different disasters. They all have high vulnerability and exposure. And as a result, disaster risk is very high. According to data, 27 states and UTs in the country are highly prone to the impact of disasters. Out of the 36 states and UTs we have, 27 states and UTs are highly vulnerable. So every region in the country is hit by some disaster or the other throughout the year. And now that the frequency of disasters have gone up and the impact also has increased due to climate change, India is bearing a bigger impact, a bigger burden of these disasters. That is why disaster management becomes extremely crucial. You can't have an ad hoc approach to deal with disaster management. You can't simply react after a disaster has happened, right? Let's say after a flood or after a cyclone, right? After the disaster has happened, then you can't react. Reaction is always, it's useless in saving lives. What we should focus upon is proactive planning, preparation, and efforts to prevent and mitigate the impact of disasters. You can't have an ad hoc approach to disaster management. It's not just a one-time task that is done by the government. This should become a part of day-to-day governance. It should become a part of regular administration and governance. That is when our efforts will improve. That is when we will be able to save lives and prevent some disasters and mitigate the impact of other disasters. To achieve this, we need a comprehensive, holistic approach. And that is why we have adopted the disaster management cycle. A cyclical approach has been adopted for disaster management, and we have mainstreamed this in our governance and administration. Now, let me tell you why this is important. See, before India enacted the Disaster Management Act, and before we adopted some of the measures suggested by the United Nations, India was very poor in disaster management. Not just India, around the world. If you go back to 1990s, all right, until 1990s, almost every country thought that disasters are one-time emergencies which are happening. So most countries, they did not have a comprehensive approach to disaster management. They would simply react after a disaster occurred. They would only provide some basic emergency relief and then forget about the incident. For example, India was hit by a super cyclone in 1999. 10,000 people were killed in Odisha. India was hit by a devastating earthquake in Gujarat in the same period, the Byju earthquake, which flattened the whole Byju region and killed thousands of people. In 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami caused massive destruction to Tamil Nadu in particular. More than 1 lakh people were killed in India. We didn't have a structured response to disaster management, and that is the reason why the death count was so high. Once these disasters happened, governments would only react. They would simply provide some search and rescue operations to save the people who are lost, who are trapped, who are hurt, and some relief would be given, some food supplies, shelter, medicines, clothing, etc. Some compensation maybe, but after a few weeks, after a few months, everybody would forget about the disaster. The people, the region would remain affected for many, many years to come. This was the general approach to disaster management until 1990s. Be it in India or around the world, the general approach to disaster management was a ad hoc emergency approach. It was a reactive approach. There was no planning, no dedicated funds, no dedicated institutions. Just after a disaster, there would be some response, some emergency response would be there, and some relief measures would be carried out. That's it. After that, everybody would forget and move on. The government, the media, and the public in general, they would forget the disaster and they would move on as if nothing had happened. But the victims, the region would continue to suffer for many, many years. This approach was not suitable at all in today's world. So thankfully, a very big transformation happened in the 1990s until early 2000. During this period is very critical with regard to disaster management. During these 2 decades, there was global awareness built through the United Nations regarding the long-term impact of disasters and the bigger impact on poor countries, developing countries, the higher impact on poor population. This became very, very clear because by 1990s, we were witnessing more disasters because of climate change and global warming. So the UN laid the framework for a structured, holistic response to disaster management. The UN brought out the theory of DM cycle, disaster management cycle, so that disaster management becomes a continuous process within governance and administration. The UN promoted a proactive approach instead of a reactive approach. Instead of merely reacting after a disaster, the focus of DM cycle was to be proactive. Pay attention to the different stages of a disaster and take adequate measures to prevent the disaster or at least mitigate the disaster. So by early 2000, this became the norm, the standard, and India also adopted these standards. These three disasters I mentioned, they were a wake-up call for India. The Odisha super cyclone, Byju earthquake, and 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. These three disasters were a wake-up call for India, and then the Manmohan Singh government, the UPA government, introduced the landmark legislation, the Disaster Management Act, that made disaster management more structured in the country. Today, we have dedicated institutions, funds, and architecture to deal with disaster management. Governments are not just responding to a disaster, but it has become a part of day-to-day administration and governance. So that is why you should know what is this DM cycle, what is this disaster management cycle. According to the disaster management cycle, there are three stages in a disaster. The first stage is the pre-disaster phase. Second stage is during disaster phase. And the last stage, the third stage, is post-disaster. This is what completes the disaster management cycle. According to this theory, in the pre-disaster phase, governments have to focus on prevention and mitigation through better planning and better preparedness. That is, you should anticipate a disaster before it occurs. For that, you need adequate research, scientific research to understand the disasters, to understand your country's vulnerability. You have to create a hazard map to identify which regions are prone to which disasters. You have to develop early warning and forecasting systems by making the right technological investments so you can forecast a disaster and give real-time alerts before it occurs. You have to implement few structural measures to protect the vulnerable communities, like building a cyclone shelter, building barriers and retention walls to protect people from landslides, building better dams and canals to manage flood waters, right? They all come under pre-disaster planning and preparedness. The focus is to prevent a disaster if possible. And if it's not under human control, at least mitigate the impact, reduce the impact. So pre-disaster is focused on planning and preparation before the disaster actually occurs. Then during disaster, when a disaster has hit, that is where you focus on your response and relief. If you have planned adequately, prepared adequately, you will have the right resources to provide for effective emergency response and relief. Let's say you have a trained, dedicated disaster response force. Let's say they have the right training, weapons, and skills. They can immediately rush to the hit areas, the disaster hit areas, and save as many lives as possible. In an earthquake, in a cyclone, or in a tsunami, right? People will be trapped. People will be caught in dangerous conditions. They'll still be alive. So a lot of lives can be saved if you have effective search and rescue operations. During floods, cyclones, tsunamis, earthquakes, etc., a lot of people could be trapped in dangerous conditions who are still alive. So through effective search and rescue operations, or SAR operations, you can save as many lives as possible. This is done during the disaster phase, when the disaster is about to happen or when it has already happened. Through better planning and resources, you can effectively save a lot of lives and provide the emergency relief to the people, provide first aid, supply food, medicines, clothing, and shelter, and give some immediate compensation to protect that population. This is during disaster, where you focus on emergency relief and response. Then finally, after the disaster, after a disaster has happened, few days later, you focus on long-term reconstruction and recovery of the region and the people. As I told you, the impact of a disaster can last for months and years and decades. So you have to rebuild the economy, rebuild the infrastructure that has been destroyed, provide for jobs, provide for insurance, long-term compensation. This requires adequate attention and investments in the post-disaster phase. After a disaster, you can't simply forget the people and the region. You have to bring normalcy back to the region by focusing on reconstruction, rehabilitation, and recovery. You have to reconstruct what has been destroyed. If critical infrastructure has been damaged, you have to rebuild the critical infrastructure. Roads, railway lines, power lines, mobile and internet connectivity. If they have been damaged, you have to restore that. You have to rehabilitate the displaced people. If people have lost their homes and their livelihood, you have to provide rehabilitation for them. Help them in rebuilding their homes. Help them in creating alternate livelihoods and jobs. That is how you can provide for long-term recovery for a disaster-hit region. This is one of the most important phases which previously was neglected. And again, you repeat the cycle, you repeat the steps. So basically, you never stop in a disaster management cycle. It's a constant cycle which is going on. Pre-disaster, during disaster, post-disaster, and back to pre-disaster. Such a cyclical approach, when it is mainstreamed into day-to-day governance and administration, it will provide for effective disaster management. Through better planning and preparedness, you can prevent some disasters. You can reduce the impact of some disasters. Through better planning and preparedness, you can provide effective emergency relief and response. And through focus on post-disaster recovery, you can reconstruct what has been destroyed. You can rehabilitate people and their jobs that they have lost. Is that clear? So this is the current concept in disaster management. It's no longer an ad hoc, reactive response. It is a proactive, structured, holistic response that was promoted through the United Nations. The UN conferences that happened on disaster management introduced these concepts. Many countries adopted it, including India. And we have brought out our own legal framework, created our own architecture and institutions. And as a result, India has successfully implemented the disaster management cycle. Is that clear? So understanding this is extremely important. I have given the points in the next couple of slides. You can go through them later. I have given the points to help you understand what is done under pre-disaster phase. What do you mean by prevention, mitigation, preparedness, which I just explained. Then the important points during disaster. What is emergency response? What is search and rescue? What kind of relief should be provided? And finally, post-disaster recovery phase, where focus is on rehabilitation and reconstruction. Is that clear? So if there is a question on this, a static question, you have to explain these stages and draw the disaster management cycle. Draw it like a flow chart. All right. Depict the 3 stages and the key measures taken under each stage, and then explain this. You can even take an example to substantiate the argument. Take a disaster as a case study and explain how disaster management cycle is a more effective approach compared to the earlier reactive ad hoc approach. You can compare the 2004 tsunami with the current disasters. Or you can compare the Odisha super cyclone of 1999, where 10,000 people were killed, with the latest cyclones that have hit India, and how we have reduced the loss of human life and how we have protected our environment and infrastructure. That comparison will highlight the importance of disaster management cycle. Or you can take one disaster as an example and suggest the measures taken under each stage. Take floods or cyclones, for example, or earthquakes, and suggest what steps can be taken briefly under pre-disaster, during disaster, and post-disaster. Even that will help in highlighting the importance of the disaster management cycle. Got it? But for such a question, you have to write this flow chart. You have to depict the stages like this through a flow chart and then explain the key points. I hope this is clear to everyone. Is that clear? So with this, I complete my detailed discussion of all the basic concepts and fundamentals. Please let me know if you have any doubts, any questions. I can take them for a few minutes. And after that, we will proceed to the next topic. I'll be starting with different types of disasters. As I told you, I'll take up one disaster after the other, like floods, droughts, cyclones, etc. We'll understand the geography related aspect. We'll understand how these disasters are caused. We'll understand what is the impact and what measures we can take under disaster management cycle. Right? We'll discuss this completely after a short discussion on your doubts and questions. So till what time we have class? We have class today till 9 p.m. Since we started a little late due to unavoidable circumstances, we'll be continuing till 9 p.m. only today. From tomorrow, the regular class will continue from 5 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. SMEs, please push more questions. Pick up all the good questions and put it in the dismiss section. Aniket is asking, sir, please provide practice questions for the topic that have been completed. I will discuss previous year questions. Don't worry. At the end, I will give you the list of some previous questions and we will discuss a couple of them so you can practice answer writing. Himaya is asking, sir, please explain space weather. See, in outer space, you have cosmic weather conditions, right? From the sun and from the universe. There are cosmic rays and solar flares that are bombarding the Earth's atmosphere. You also have electromagnetic radiation, which is bombarding the Earth's atmosphere. So that Earth's atmosphere is acting like a shield, protecting life on Earth. So these cosmic events, extraterrestrial events happening in outer space, they potentially could breach the atmosphere and harm the life on Earth, like an asteroid strike or solar storms and solar flares. Is that clear? So that could become an extraterrestrial hazard. Abhinav is asking a very good question. Sir, is lightning a disaster? See, lightning, believe it or not, is responsible for one of the highest number of deaths in our country and even around the world. Even though lightning occurs randomly here and there, most of us ignore the threat of lightning, including the government. Lightning is a major disaster. In India itself, thousands of lives, at least 2,500 people are killed every year because of lightning. But unfortunately, Government of India has not notified lightning as a natural disaster. Under the Disaster Management Act and the Disaster Management Policy and Plan, the Indian government has not notified lightning officially as a natural disaster. State governments have been urging the central government, many state governments which are affected, especially West Bengal, Odisha, Jharkhand, they witnessed the highest lightning related deaths in the country. They have been requesting the center to notify lightning also as a natural disaster, but central government hasn't done it. Is that clear? But according to experts, lightning should be treated as a disaster because of the large number of deaths that occur. Rahul is asking, sir, next year is El Nino year. Will it cause droughts in India and floods in South America, which is climatological, meteorological hazard? See, El Nino year is not next year. It is this year itself. El Nino phenomena has already begun in 2023. It might last for 2-3 years at least. So we will witness higher temperatures in several parts of the world. As you know, Indian monsoons will be adversely affected because of El Nino phenomena. So rainfall will reduce in India. There are high chances of shortage of rainfall causing water scarcity and even droughts. All right. Other parts of the world might witness heavy rainfall and floods. So El Nino has a very wide impact around the world and it influences weather phenomena around the world. So yes, meteorological, climatological hazards will go up because of El Nino phenomena. Next, Jansi Rani is asking how to draw graphs in answer writing. Is it needed? Wherever necessary, it is good to depict your answers through flowcharts, graphs, or infographics. Wherever possible. You don't have to draw perfect graphs, just an illustration, right? If you remember some data, if you can depict that, well and good. It's an additional point. If you don't remember, if you can't present that, even then it's fine. As long as your points are good, the structure of the answer is good, you don't have to draw diagrams and graphs every time. If you can do that, it's great. It's a addition. It's a value addition. Even if you can't do it, it's fine. You can still write a good answer and get good marks. Vaishna is asking, please repeat the disasters that were wake-up calls for India. In late 90s and early 2000, India was hit by 3 major disasters. If you want, let's write it down. Yeah. First class. For the last. Okay, I'll do that. Got it. Yeah. Sorry guys for the interruption. There was a small update from the operations team. They've informed me that a feedback form has been shared with you for the previous classes. I think you guys had history and I think one other subject. So for these classes which got completed last week, the feedback form has been shared. So please fill up the feedback form. SMEs have shared it in the chat box as well. And I think you'll get a mail. So please ensure you fill up the feedback form for classes which have already happened just last week. Is that clear? So coming back to the 3 disasters which transformed India. Between late 90s and early 2000, India was hit by 3 major disasters. The 1999 super cyclone that hit Odisha, the Byju earthquake in Gujarat, again in the late 90s, and in 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami that caused a lot of devastation, especially in Tamil Nadu. These were the 3 major disasters in India during this period, which served as a wake-up call for India to focus more on disaster management. So please make a note. Laya is asking, sir, before adopting UN measures, how India protected people from disasters? As I told you, before 2005, we had a very ad hoc approach to disaster management. Very reactive approach. We didn't have a structured response. Only when disasters happened, we would give some basic relief. We would carry out some search and rescue operations through the Indian Armed Forces, through the Army, Navy, and Air Force. We would rescue people, give some medical support, give some small compensation, right? And then forget about it. There was no pre-disaster planning and preparedness. There was no post-disaster recovery and reconstruction. The only phase that existed before was during disaster, emergency relief and response. Mithun is asking, sir, kindly explain rehabilitation and recovery point. See, as I told you, when there is a large disaster which has hit a region, right, the region would have been very badly affected. A lot of people would have been killed, infrastructure would have been damaged, economy would have been destroyed. So to bring normalcy back to the region, if you have to bring that region back to normalcy, you have to focus on long-term recovery and reconstruction. What does it mean? It means you rebuild what was destroyed. If roads were damaged, rebuild that road. If power cables, power plants were destroyed, rebuild that critical infrastructure. If railway lines were destroyed, rebuild the railway line. Or else, how can the region come back to normalcy? So you have to restore the infrastructure, the connectivity. You have to compensate the people. Those who suffered losses, compensate them. People would have lost their jobs, their livelihood. Farmers may not be able to carry out agriculture because of a disaster, right? Let's say coastal flooding has happened due to a cyclone or a tsunami. Salt water would have entered agricultural fields, thereby destroying agriculture for many years. Or cattle might have been killed in a flood, right? Farmers could have lost their sheep, goats, chicken, pigs, cows, etc. So their livelihoods are completely uprooted. Fishermen would have lost their boats, or fishing might have been prohibited for a long time because of the disaster. So as a result, livelihoods would be upset, would be turned upside down. So government has to create jobs, provide alternate income. This is what you mean by long-term recovery and reconstruction. You rebuild the infrastructure, help the people rebuild their house, help the people get some job and alternate income, restore livelihoods, provide long-term compensation, and bring the region back to normalcy. This is a long-term effort. It can't be done in few weeks. It will take few years of effort to bring the region back to normalcy through reconstruction and recovery. Shaimil is asking, how are social factors key causes for vulnerability? I actually explained this point. Just take one simple example. Let's say in case of urban flooding or in case of heat wave and cold wave, the rich and upper class and middle class can protect themselves easily because they have the money, they have the resources to protect themselves from heat wave and cold wave conditions. I'm sure most of us would have never experienced the full impact of heat wave and cold wave, right? But those who come from below poverty line, from very vulnerable sections, they are forced to work in the open, irrespective of the heat or the cold conditions. So they are more exposed, thereby they take the bigger impact. So social conditions and social factors directly play a role in vulnerability. The rich and the middle class are always well off. They are better with regard to disasters compared to the poor and the weaker sections. The same analysis applies for developed countries and developing countries and underdeveloped countries. Today, Japan is a world leader in disaster management. Why do you think all disaster management conferences have been hosted by Japan? All 3 UN conferences on disaster have happened in Japan, at Yokohama, Hyogo, and Sendai. That's because Japan has been a leader from the beginning in the field of disaster management. And don't forget, Japan has been able to do that because it's a developed country. It's a rich country with resources and money and technology to take these measures. Japan was forced to do this because it's very, very vulnerable to disasters. Japan is hit by earthquakes, tsunamis, typhoons, and it also has volcanoes. It's sitting on the Pacific Ring of Fire. So Japan was forced to protect itself, and since it's a rich developed country, it was able to achieve this progress in disaster management. But other developing countries like Indonesia is also very prone to earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanoes and whatnot. But developing countries can never take the same measures because of lack of resources and technology and money. Poor countries in Africa, for example, poor countries in Asia, they couldn't withstand the impact of COVID-19. Why? Because they didn't have the money, the resources, and the technology. So social factors play a role in vulnerability. Please understand that. Last question, Shruti is asking, based on current disasters, which type of questions can be asked? A number of questions can be asked. Now take, for example, the latest floods and landslides in northern India. There could be a question asking, what is landslide? Elaborate the recent landslides that occurred in Himachal Pradesh. That is a question. Or there could be a question on heat waves that are currently going on in southern Europe. UPSC might ask, southern Europe and the Mediterranean region has suffered from intense, devastating heat wave and forest fire conditions. This has been driven by climate change and global warming. Critically analyze. So such questions, which is a mix of static and current affairs, can be asked based on recent disasters. Okay. So guys, these were the questions. I've tried answering as many as possible. Now let's move on to the next topic. Okay, last question. Anushka is asking, what is political vulnerability? The political system in a country determines vulnerability as well. Democracies, which are responding to the people, the needs of the people, they will focus more on disaster management. Dictatorships, countries hit by conflict, civil wars, they will not focus on disaster management. See, recently in Afghanistan, there have been earthquakes and floods in the last 1 year itself. Since it's ruled by Taliban, it's gone through decades of conflict and civil war. People in Afghanistan are suffering. They could never withstand the impact of even a minor disaster because Afghanistan is more vulnerable due to its political system. But a country like India, Japan, US, these are democracies where you have stable governments, efficient governments working for the people. So political system also determines vulnerability. All right. Now let's move on to the next topic. As I told you, we have completed the basic fundamental concepts. Just to summarize, you understood what is a disaster, how is it different from a hazard. We spoke about types of hazards, natural hazards and man-made hazards with examples. We understood vulnerability and exposure and disaster risk. We spoke about India's vulnerability. We understood the connection between environmental degradation and disaster risk. And we spoke about disaster management cycle, right? The different phases in disaster management. All these key concepts have been covered. Now, we will move to the next chapter, the next module itself, and talk about different disasters one by one. This discussion is both from a geography point of view and also from a disaster management point of view. We'll start with floods, and then I'll pick up one by one. We'll understand the causes, the factors responsible for the disaster, right? That's a geography-based discussion. We'll understand the impact. That is a disaster management-based discussion. And finally, we'll talk about the preventive mitigative measures under the disaster management cycle. So that if there is a question asking you to explain a particular disaster or its impact or India's vulnerability to this disaster or what measures can be taken in disaster management, then you will have all the points needed to write a good mains answer. All right. So let us start with floods. We have 20 more minutes to go. I think it's sufficient to finish the topic, at least the topic on floods. All right. Tomorrow we can pick it up and continue the discussion. But in the next 20 minutes, let's try to cover floods as a disaster. So how do you define a flood? How do you explain what is a flood? Again, don't go by the textbook definition. Don't sit and mug up. Don't learn by rote memory. That will never help you. Understand the concept. It's very simple. and then express in your own words. Build your own answer. Never copy from a notes or from a textbook. Never do that, because many students will have access to the same notes, to the same material. What's the difference between you and the rest? Toppers have to set themselves apart to top this exam. The way you can set yourself apart is by writing your own answers. So if you understand the concept without memorizing and rote learning and mugging up the facts, and if you explain in your own words the concept that you have understood, you will get more marks. Evaluators will easily figure this out, right? The moment they look at the answer sheet, they'll get to know whether this student has understood the concept, or he or she, are they simply mugging up and vomiting the facts. There is a very big difference between the two. And evaluators are smart enough, they are experienced enough to figure this out. So when I ask you what is a flood, don't give me a textbook definition. All right? Of course, I've given you some points. Don't mug it up. Read, understand, and then write this in your own words. If you ask me, I will say that flood is a situation where the drainage basin has been breached from its carrying capacity. That is my explanation, if you ask me. Now, you can express this in different ways, maybe with an example. See, every water body has a certain carrying capacity. Do you agree? Every water body has a certain carrying capacity, be it a lake, a pond, a river, a wetland, or even the seas and the oceans, right? For simpler understanding and explanation, take a bucket. Every bucket has a certain carrying capacity, right? Let's say you have a 5-liter capacity bucket. This bucket, or let's say it's a drum or a bucket, it can hold 5 liters of water. That is the carrying capacity of this bucket. Now, what will happen? What will happen if I pour 7 liters of water into this bucket? It's obvious, right? Even a primary student will answer this question. Once the carrying capacity of the bucket is reached, once the threshold is breached, the excess, that is basically the surplus water, which is 7 minus 5, that is the excess 2 liters, this will spill out and it will flood the nearby region, the region around the bucket. That is the simple understanding of floods in the real world as well. Every water body has a certain carrying capacity. Every river, drainage basin, pond, lake, wetland, they all have a certain carrying capacity. They can hold only a certain volume of water. For some reason, if there is a sudden flow of excess water, this capacity will be breached and the excess will spill over, which we call as a flood. This overflow of water that submerges the nearby land is what we call as a flood. Is that clear? So this is one instance of flooding where there is surplus water that is breaching the capacity, the carrying capacity. All right, this is one instance where a flood can occur. Can you guys think of any other instance where a flood might occur? Can you mention that in the comments? I have given you one instance. I'm telling you that a bucket or a water body has a carrying capacity. If there is a surplus flow, suddenly that surplus will spill over. That is one example. Is there any other instance? Breakage of dam, cloudburst, heavy rains. You're explaining the reasons again. I'm asking, is there any other instance where a flood can occur? Melting of glaciers. No, that's not the exact answer I'm looking for. Shivani has given the right answer. Blocking of drains. Any blockage can also reduce the carrying capacity. Please think about what I'm saying. Now, let's say in this bucket, which can hold 5 liters of water, I have added some soil and rocks and mud. Because of the material which I have added, the carrying capacity of the bucket has reduced to 3 liters. Now, even if I pour 4 liters or 5 liters of water, even then there will be a flood because I have reduced the carrying capacity through a blockage. Now, let's say there is a river channel and the river channel is blocked because of sediments, because of siltation, the silt deposition. Or let's say there has been a landslide. Lot of soil material, rocks and earth material has crashed into the river and it has created a natural dam. Because of such blockage, carrying capacity reduces. I'll give you one more example. Let's say there is a lake in a city, a lake in Bangalore. The lake has a certain carrying capacity, but because of poor waste management, all the urban waste, the sewage, plastic, everything has been dumped into the lake. So the lake's drainage has been blocked, thus reducing its carrying capacity. So even if there is regular rainfall, the water is going to spill because the water has no place to go. Is that clear? So this is another instance where flooding can happen. One instance is where there is surplus flow of water breaching the capacity. For example, heavy rains, sudden heavy rainfall or cloud burst, or a cyclone or a tsunami which has brought a lot of sudden water. So sudden flow of water which is beyond the capacity, the carrying capacity, can cause floods. That is one instance. Second instance is where the channels are blocked due to some reason because of waste deposition, silt and sediment deposition. If the channels are blocked, then the carrying capacity has reduced. Even if there is regular rainfall and regular flow of water, the excess will still spill over because the carrying capacity has gone down. Got it? Such a situation is defined as a flood. Now see how I explained this. I didn't go by textbook definition. I took some examples and I explained it in my own words. All right, I haven't memorized this. If you attend different classes, you will see that my explanation is also different in every class. That's because I'm explaining based on my conceptual understanding. That is what you should be doing. Don't stick to what points are given. Don't stick to the textbook definition or what I'm explaining. Understand the core concept, then write this in your own words with your own example. That is when your answer will stand out. Is that clear? So flood is essentially an overflow of water because the carrying capacity of the drainage channel has been breached. So such floods can occur in natural water bodies like rivers, wetlands, lakes, etc. It can occur in irrigation canals, which are man-made. All right. They can be caused by heavy rainfall. They can be caused by landslides or a dam breach or cloud burst. There are plenty of reasons which can cause a flood, both natural and man-made reasons. Even increasing melting of glaciers and ice caps, right, which is triggered by global warming. Faster melting of the snow in glaciers and ice caps can also lead to heavy water flow that can breach the carrying capacity and cause floods. Heavy precipitation, that's heavy rainfall, right, or heavy snowfall. This could increase the water flow, breaching the carrying capacity, causing floods. So a flood is a catastrophic hazard. It's both natural, man-made, or a combination of the two. And it's such a catastrophic hazard, it's such a tragedy that thousands of people can get killed. Lot of people can get injured. Lot of property can get damaged and destroyed. Private houses, entire cities, agricultural fields, and even large infrastructure projects can be completely uprooted and devastated. So floods are quite dangerous in their impact. Is that clear? They can cause extensive damage to private property, to public infrastructure. When the flow rate exceeds the carrying capacity of a channel, of a drainage channel, right? That is where these flood waters, these excess or surplus water will rush into these low-lying areas. And the low-lying areas become highly prone to the impact of these floods. So this, of course, has a huge economic impact as well, a huge social impact as well. But the immediate impact is felt by the people of the region, where there is loss of lives, injuries, people could get trapped, right? They will lose their homes, their property, their livelihood. So that is the immediate impact. And also the damage to infrastructure. And in the long run, there will be economic and social impact as well because of floods. Now, let me show you a couple of images and help you better understand how a flooding situation occurs. All right, how there are some natural checks and balances against floods and how we humans are contributing to more and more flooding incidents. Right, let's understand this with some infographics and with some examples. In this image, you're looking at a river channel that has been depicted here. All right, this is the drainage channel, the river channel where the water is flowing through. These are the river banks present on the sides, the river bank. Now, when there is regular flow of water in the drainage channel, of course, a lot of sediments are getting deposited at the bottom. Sediment deposition will reduce the carrying capacity, as we understood. And also, heavy rainfall or heavy flow of water due to some reason can also increase the water flow in the channel. Or let's say, on the riverbed itself, construction has been done. During dry season, let's say during summer season, water would have receded and humans would have occupied these areas, encroached the areas and built cities and homes, etc. In any of these instances, when there is a sudden flow of water, when there is an increase in flow of water, and when there is a reduction in the carrying capacity, the excess water will spill into the river banks and further flood the downstream areas. But the beauty of nature is that there is a natural mechanism created in nature to prevent future floods. Because every time there is a flood, the sediments which were at the bottom, they get pushed up towards the banks and the sediments get deposited on the sides, as you can see here in the image. Let's say for 2 years there is consecutive flooding, right? Because of the fast flowing water which is getting pushed out and flooding the nearby banks, the sediments and silt also is getting pushed and getting deposited at the top, thereby forming a natural leave. It's like a small natural dam-like structure called a leave. The sediment that is deposited through years of flooding becomes a natural protection over a period of time. It increases the channel depth. It increases the carrying capacity after repeated flooding, thereby naturally preventing future floods. This is nature's equilibrium that exists. Got it? Maybe for 2-3 years there is constant flooding. But because of flooding during every rainy season, the sediments are pushed, they get deposited at the banks and form these natural leaves, which is like a small temporary dam-like structure. So this will increase the channel depth. It can hold more water in the coming years, thereby preventing repeated floods. But we have broken this equilibrium. What have we humans done? We have destroyed this natural balance. We have built cities in the floodplain. We have encroached the drainage basin itself and the catchment area. We have created agricultural fields. We have built cities, apartments, shopping malls, Even government infrastructure has been built in encroached land area. So obviously, when there is excess water coming in due to heavy rains, these encroached areas, which are part of the drainage catchment area, they will be flooded. Where do you expect the water to go? I'll give you one example. Take Chennai. Chennai, a few decades ago, would never witness urban flooding. But of late, during every cyclone, during monsoon season, repeatedly Chennai is suffering from urban flooding. Why? Because the river channels, they have been blocked due to waste which has been carelessly disposed. And also, the catchment area, the drainage area has been encroached by the real estate construction mafia. Governments, local authorities especially, the municipal authorities, they have failed to enforce the construction building standards. Even though we have rules and regulations to prevent encroachment, local authorities, politicians, governments, they have a nexus with builders and the real estate mafia. Right? They take bribes, they allow these illegal constructions to happen, they allow entire layouts and apartments and residential complexes to come up in drainage basins and catchment areas, even though they know that it's a low-lying area. So after a few years, when there is a sudden heavy rainfall, even if the rainfall is pretty normal, it will cause massive flooding and it will turn that into a disaster. That's what is happening in most cities, not just in India, even around the world. Of course, there can be unprecedented rainfall, which is not under our control. Extreme weather conditions can bring heavy rainfall, which we can't control. Right? Climate change also may not be a factor there. Irrespective of climate change, there could be heavy unprecedented rainfall, right? That can cause natural floods. But we humans are contributing to it. Apart from global warming, through our encroachment, through destruction of carrying capacity, through waste disposal that has been done carelessly, we have reduced the carrying capacity and thus we are experiencing more floods. Take Uttarakhand, another classic example. Uttarakhand is already highly vulnerable because the Himalayan ecology is very sensitive. In such an area, which is filled with hilly mountains and slopey areas and fast-flowing rivers, we have taken up large-scale construction to promote tourism, to create economic opportunities. We have overexploited Uttarakhand, right? We have built large projects without any concern for the ecology and the environment. We have built roads and hydropower dams in sensitive locations. So heavy equipment are moving in slopey areas. Explosions are being carried out to carry out these construction projects. So these activities in hilly, slopey areas causes landslides. Got it? We have allowed resorts to come up, townships and urban areas to come up right next to riverbeds through encroachment. We have also promoted exploitative tourism. So all these activities are contributing to deforestation of the hilly areas and the slopey areas. So when the forest and vegetation is cleared, the soil becomes weak and it slips down during earthquakes and heavy rains, causing landslides in the downstream. And as you know, landslide causes a blockage of the river channel. And when there is heavy rainfall, the natural dam is going to breach. It will rupture, causing flash floods down the stream. So this has become quite common. That is how ecological destruction, encroachment, and reduction in carrying capacity is adding to the problems. So that's why I told you that floods are not just an outcome of natural factors, there are man-made factors as well, which are acting in combination. So if you ask me the causes for floods, it includes heavy rainfall, cyclones and storm surge in coastal areas, cloud bursts, which usually occur in hilly areas, landslides, which again occur in hilly regions, any sudden release of water from dams and reservoirs, or cases of urban flooding where there is unplanned urbanization, encroachment, irresponsible throwing of debris and wastage, right? These factors add to urban floods and, of course, the long-term climate change and global warming. All these factors are responsible in combination. So it's a mix of natural and man-made factors contributing to the increasing incidence of floods in India and around the world. So what happens when there is a flood? I'm sure all of you can tell me the impact. I need not even explain this, right? All you have to do is you have to list it out in a proper structure, in a proper organized manner. If the question is asking you to talk about the impact of floods for 10 marks, write these points and give some explanation with an example. That's it. All right. When there is floods, there is loss of life and property. A lot of people could get killed and injured. There is a lot of damage to property, private property, right? Houses and any other private infrastructure, including agricultural fields, could be damaged, and even public infrastructure, critical infrastructure could be severely damaged. Roads, power lines, mobile internet connectivity, then hydropower dams, they could all suffer extensive damage during floods. Damage to agricultural crops and to the environment. As I told you, floods bring a lot of dirty water along with soil, sediments, waste and debris. This can pollute water bodies. It can even result in spread of diseases, which is harmful to the environment and ecology as well. It can harm biodiversity. Several animals, birds, aquatic species could get killed. Take, for example, the flooding in Brahmaputra Valley in Assam and Arunachal Pradesh. Every year, the Brahmaputra floods, killing rhinoceros, tigers, elephants, deer, right? And many other species are killed. For example, in Kaziranga National Park. Every year, Kaziranga National Park in Assam gets flooded by the Brahmaputra, killing many animals, birds, and species. So it causes biodiversity loss. And water bodies get polluted. Even though there is excess water, it's not worthy of drinking. It's not suitable for drinking. Right? The water will not be potable, meaning it's not clean enough to be used for consumption. The water will be filled with waste material, soil, dirt, toxic material as well, including dangerous pathogens. So such water is dangerous for consumption and it could spread diseases as well. So it causes environmental loss, biodiversity loss. It leads to large-scale displacement of people, spread of diseases and water scarcity. And that is the irony here. Even though floods are caused by excess water, there will be water scarcity because you can't drink that water. You can't use that for human consumption. This polluted water is not fit for human consumption. So it will take a lot of time to ensure that normalcy is brought back to such a region. Clear? Now, which regions in India are prone? Let me show you the vulnerability and hazard map of India with regard to floods. As far as flood is concerned, these are the areas in India which are vulnerable and prone to the impact. This is the hazard map of India for floods. So which are the regions? First, you have the Indus drainage basin, right? The Indus rivers, particularly Ravi, Bias, Satluj, Jhelum and Chenab, which flow in India before flowing into Pakistan. They flood. Recently, just few days back, Punjab was very badly hit due to the flooding of the Bias River, which is part of the Indus drainage basin. Then the Gangetic drainage basin, the Ganga river basin, and Ganga and all its tributaries, including the Yamuna, which is right now flooding Delhi and other parts of the region. Since many days, Yamuna has been rising to dangerous levels, causing massive floods in Delhi, UP and other parts of the region. There are many rivers that flow down from the Himalayas, from Nepal to India. You have Gandak, you have Kosi, Gagra and many other tributaries of the Ganga, which are known to cause floods in Uttarakhand, UP and Bihar. The Kosi River is called the Sorrow of Bihar. The Hooghly River in West Bengal is called the Sorrow of Bengal, right? So the Gangetic Basin is highly vulnerable. Next, the Brahmaputra River Valley. The Brahmaputra that comes from China, from Tibet, right? It enters India and causes floods in Assam and Arunachal Pradesh. Also causes flooding in Bangladesh. There are few other rivers in northeast India, like the Barak River, Barak, Feni, even the Teesta that flows from Sikkim to West Bengal to Bangladesh is known to cause floods. Then coming to Western India, even here, the Chambal River and heavy rains in Gujarat and Rajasthan is known to cause floods. This is quite interesting. Even though Gujarat, Rajasthan are usually arid, semi-arid regions, of late, the sudden heavy rainfall being received in these regions is causing more floods. Because in such arid areas, the drainage system is not well developed. Because since millions of years, enough water has not flown through Rajasthan and Gujarat. The terrain is not accustomed to receive heavy water. So even if there is a slightly heavy rainfall, because of the poor drainage system, there is flooding in Gujarat and Rajasthan. Then you have Mahanadi that causes flooding in Odisha, especially coastal parts of Odisha, and most of the peninsular rivers, right? They're all prone to flooding. Godavari, Krishna, Tungabhadra, Kaveri, and many west-flowing rivers as well in Kerala and Karnataka. They're all known to cause floods across southern India. In the Krishna Godavari basin and in this whole region, right? In Maharashtra, Karnataka, Andhra, Telangana, floods are quite common. The Kaveri River also is known to flood, impacting Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. In Kerala, Kerala has become very, very prone of late. Every monsoon, several west-flowing rivers in Kerala, they flood in the Western Ghats, causing landslides as well. And it leads to a lot of devastation in Kerala, right? So like this, the different catchment areas and drainage basins in India are highly prone. And there are many examples in front of us. So in the exam, you can quote the floods in Kerala, the recent floods in Kerala. You can quote the floods in Uttarakhand, the latest floods in Himachal Pradesh, in Punjab, right, in Assam. All these are latest examples. So in current affairs, whenever you come across these recent disasters, please make a note. All right, just write down when and where the disaster happened, what is the broad impact, what are the causes. Just one small paragraph so that you are up to date with the latest floods that are happening in India. Similarly, at the global level, floods in Europe, floods in South Korea, floods in Australia, right? Floods in South America. Just keep a small note. Don't go into the details, not needed. Just where it happened, when, maybe how. 3-4 lines about these incidents so that you have enough latest examples to add to your answer to substantiate the answer. Got it? So I think for today, this is enough. We can end the session for now. Tomorrow, I'll continue the discussion. There are few points left, a couple of points left under floods. We can wrap it up tomorrow and then continue the discussion with regard to other disasters. All right. So today was a good class. We have covered quite a number of important topics. I hope you guys have liked it. More importantly, I hope you guys have understood everything that I have discussed. Right? So let's meet tomorrow again. Any questions, any doubts, please bring it up. I'm more than happy to answer them. And we'll continue from here. I'll start from the nodal agencies for flood forecasting and early warning. Got it? So that is it for today. Thanks for watching. Have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow.